He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I hope you've all been having a stellar spooky October thus far. It's mind-blowing just how fast this month is actually flying by. Maybe seeing the Christmas decorations in stores probably doesn't help, but sticking to the Halloween theme, we've got another episode diving into more paranormal content. Now, last week, I briefly mentioned an encounter that someone had when visiting a haunted war site, and I want to expand upon that for today's episode. But a quick couple of plugs before that. You can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, our social media channels, and should you wish to reach us directly, you can do so via CryptidClues@gmail.com. So, war, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. But in all seriousness, there is a lot of debate on if war itself is human nature. And I think this can be broken down further where war itself is not human nature. There is no scientific proof that human beings are hardwired to go to war. That's coming from Brian Ferguson, who's a professor of anthropology at Rutgers University in New Jersey. And I quote, "If the idea that war is part of human nature is not scientifically supported, alternative futures open up." End quote. Now, lots of movies and things today, I personally feel, do a good job at really emphasizing that humans always divert to war. And we cannot suppress such a thing, as it's been part of human history for thousands of years and is documented as such too. But as I alluded to prior, let's maybe swap out the term war for violence. Violence is definitely part of human nature. It isn't necessarily bad because aggression between animals is pretty much the norm, a way of life inside of nature. But there is a line that is drawn here, defined by a relatively simple choice: nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation. Now, you probably weren't expecting the human overview here and want me to get into the paranormal battlefields, which, rest assured, it is coming, but I felt that this small opener of humans and war preluding the paranormal would carry some weight to it as we transition. So in closing, humans exhibit violence due to a combination of evolutionary, psychological, and societal factors. Our primal instincts, social conditioning, and environmental influences all contribute to violent behavior. Now, spoilers if you haven't seen this movie, but I recently watched The Pope's Exorcist with Russell Crowe. It's quite a film, but there is one narrative in particular. I wanted to highlight this, that it's a specific demon taking control over a high-ranking Vatican official to help start up the Spanish Inquisition, which leads to so many deaths. Now, I have done a Clues episode on exorcisms in the past, it's on our feeds, but it's just a scary thought if one of our leaders or someone who had much influence to our leaders, hypothetically, of course, was possessed by some paranormal demonic entity, thus sending us into war or just mass killings or something like that. In the absence of a demon, our leaders may be making evil decisions to help honor or celebrate certain demons in the paranormal. Although that's a rabbit hole, that is a whole conspiracy that may be a little bit too wild to indulge in, and I'm going to leave that off to the side. So on that note, though, let's finally talk about haunted battlefields. Now, a historical war that has left many areas prominent in hauntings is the American Civil War. Starting in 1861 and ending in 1865, this war left between 620,000 and 750,000 soldiers dead, along with an undetermined number of civilian casualties, which makes this war one of the most deadliest military conflicts in American history. Now, the large gap between deaths has been a long matter of debate for years, but believe it or not, the biggest killer in this war was disease. Of all the recorded deaths in the Civil War, it was about two-thirds had actually died from disease. Now, epidemics also played a major role in halting several of the major campaigns, but this leads us to our first hotspot, Devil's Den, Gettysburg. Now, the total number of casualties here is more than 51,000. Now, the Devil's Den is a famous rock formation. And if you're watching the YouTube version, I have an image that's going to pop up for your reference right here. Now, it's basically an elevated outcropping of large, haphazard boulders that served as a Confederate sniper's nest for a fair portion of the battle and was the site of many vicious fights. Now, paranormal sightings started fairly quickly after this battle had concluded, and regular occurrences have been prominent ever since. The rocks are frequented by apparitions of soldiers along with battle sounds, but something of real interest and a frequent topic on the show is orbs. Back in 2005, there was a gentleman that was visiting this site with his family. Now, already having a pre-existing idea that ghosts are heavily associated with the location, they decided to go out around 9 p.m. to explore the area. They parked at the base of Devil's Den, shut off all the lights before exiting the vehicle, and just started to look around. Nothing happened. So they took some photos of the rocks from about 50 feet away and decided, you know what, let's turn in for the night, and they did just that. The next day, when they examined the photos, they found that in the shots was something like that of an orb. The catch is that in each photo, it was in a different location. It was not stationary. So it was deduced that maybe it was not dust or water specks in the lens. So to debunk this, though, the gentleman took more photos afterwards, thinking, okay, well, maybe it was something on the lens, just kind of overriding that thought. But when they took more photos, there was nothing on them. It was only in those select photos that something was there, and it was moving after every single photo. Could lens flare play a part in this? Absolutely. I personally don't know what time of year or how dark 9 p.m. at Gettysburg is, so there is a variety of factors to take into account, and it makes it difficult for me to form my own opinion on that. But they were convinced that these orbs were something beyond the rational might deduce it to be. I am someone who does believe in orbs, although I've never seen them. I have read my fair share of different experiences to formulate a baseline standing that I can rely on to believe in them. So I digress. Another report dates back to 1939, and this was actually published in the Harrisburg Telegraph. It was of a man driving in his car and seeing two uniformed soldiers carrying rifles and walking on the side of the road. The man pulled over to them and noticed that their uniforms were quite old. He asked them if they needed help, and they actually responded by saying their friend was injured and they did need help. The soldiers prompted the man to follow them to a nearby tree, which is propping up another one of these uniformed soldiers. Now, this one, however, was dying from a massive chest injury. The man was panicking and said he would get help immediately and race back to his car to drive to the nearest gas station. When he got there, and after telling the cashier what had happened, he was simply told not to bother with it and that the soldiers wouldn't be there when you got back. This has apparently been happening to many individuals who passed through this area back then. Now, do we know if they really talked to him, or perhaps they simply beckoned him to follow them to the injured soldier? A part of me thinks that maybe some poor souls are doomed to live in repeated scenarios for eternity, and that sometimes we encounter those scenarios being repeated or reenacted in our world. Or we could play devil's advocate here. Maybe it's just a well-established prank. Early civil reenactments were a thing back in the 1900s, although historically accurate clothing and weapons became much more of a focus in the 1980s and onwards. So in closing, we have one more tale here from Devil's Den involving a couple of hunters who allegedly got lost in the area. While searching for the way out, they saw an apparition standing on one of the largest boulders. This figure began pointing to a specific area that, strangely enough, was the way out that the men were trying to find. When the men turned around to thank this unknown person, they were gone. Now, throughout the years since then, an apparition with no shoes has appeared to some tourists that they seem to affiliate with what these hunters had basically experienced. Notably, we have a woman who had one day gotten lost as she was traversing the rocky area. That she said she started to get very anxious as she was trying her best to look for a way out, when suddenly and without warning, this man had appeared, and the man was pointing into a specific direction in the distance. Now, he disappeared as quickly as he appeared, and once she got out, she reported it to the park rangers. Now, lastly, as two women were climbing up the rocks, this is a little bit different from the person pointing a way out. A hand had reached out and grabbed the ankle of one of the women. She looked down and saw a young man dressed in a Confederate soldier uniform. She screamed, and when her friend looked over to her and she herself looked back down, the person was gone. The area was investigated and no one was found matching this young man's description. Now, there is a plethora of more reports and even photographs online, and I highly suggest taking a look yourself at all the evidence out there, because the Devil's Den certainly to this day serves as one of the most notoriously haunted battlegrounds in American history. Now, staying within the umbrella of American Civil War, let's turn our gaze towards another terrible battle. September 17th, 1862, the Battle of Antietam. Now, this creek near the small town of Sharpsburg, Maryland, was over 4 hours of intense, constant fighting that had taken place here. And on an old sunken road that separated the two farms, is where over 23,000 men were wounded, killed, or missing in action after both Confederate and Union armies battled. This area nowadays is known as the Bloody Lane due to this horrendous fight. And it's Bloody Lane that is deemed haunted. Gunfire and the smell of gunpowder are consistently reported in this area when no one is nearby. Similar to the Devil's Den, uniformed Confederate soldiers have been seen walking along the Bloody Lane. The catch about this is that while many think that initially it's just a reenactment, they quickly vanish into thin air. Now, the nearby area Burnside's Bridge, known back then as Rohrback Bridge, is equally as haunted in reports. This is where a man by the name of General Ambrose Burnside had pushed the Confederate forces back after many defeated attempts. Many soldiers were quickly buried in and around the bridge in unmarked graves, and visitors to this site report seeing orbs, specifically blue-colored balls of light, moving around the grounds. The nearby town of Sharpsburg was utilized as a Confederate hospital, so to speak, so after the battle, many people's homes and the church all served to care for and help accommodate the injured and dying soldiers. And this has led to reports of screams, flickering lights in many of the town's buildings, particularly the Church of St. Paul, which is located in Sharpsburg. So we're going to jump the pond here now and take a step way further back in time. The Battle of Edge Hill. Now, this was the first major conflict in the English Civil War, October 23rd, 1642, Warwickshire. Now, this civil war was a series of devastating conflicts that centered around a power struggle between King Charles I and Parliament. Essentially, battle lines were drawn over political, religious, and economic policy divisions. So it ended with King Charles being defeated and ensured that monarchs would never again be supreme in British politics. The English Civil War resulted in an estimated 200,000 people losing their lives both directly and indirectly as a result of the war. Now, in this specific battle, before the parliamentarian forces had retreated to Warwick, what should have been a decisive one-off battle turned into the beginning of a terrible conflict. The Royalists began to descend the slopes of Edge Hill, and after midday, and after successfully establishing their formations, began to goad the Parliament forces into opening fire. The King's forces withdrew out of range, and an artillery duel began, and this engagement had around 15,000 Parliament soldiers pitted against just under 13,000 King's soldiers. Now, this has not been the last Battle of Edge Hill. What was a somewhat after the fighting ensued confusing and just bloody massacre, it just became a nightmare. So if we jump ahead to just before Christmas, a few months later, as the battle was initially in October, we have shepherds that were walking through the area and began reporting what looked like another battle. Except this battle was not by living, breathing individuals. They reported it as apparitions actually engaging in battle again. Their voices, screams, and battle sounds all ringing out for the shepherds to hear. They reported this to their local priest, who also confirmed himself to see these apparitions reenacting the battle's events. Now, the apparitions became so famous due to the sheer volume of witnesses that news of this had actually reached King Charles, whom he sent a team to investigate. Not only did this team report seeing the ghostly soldiers in combat themselves, but they were able to identify several high-ranking officials that actually died in the battle. In an attempt to stop these apparitions from appearing, the villagers nearby finally just banded together and decided to give the Christian burials to all the corpses that they could find in the former battlefield. And it is reported a few months later significantly that the sightings started to really dwindle down, almost stop. However, to this day, haunting sounds and apparitions have still been known to appear, along with screams, cannon fire, and battle cries. Now, a neat little fact here, as a result of the Royal Commission's investigation into the Edge Hill ghosts, the Public Record Office officially recognizes the Edge Hill ghosts. They are the only British phantoms to have this distinction. Again, that is because King Charles sent a team to go and investigate this. So, in closing, for our final hotspot, Volgograd, Russia. Having been rebuilt from the ground up after 1945, the city once called Stalingrad is plagued by ghosts from World War II's watershed battle, which saw Nazi Germany's defeat. Now, the Battle of Stalingrad was one of the most deadliest battles in all of World War II. A nearly 200-day clash that saw more than 1 million Soviet soldiers killed and around 800,000 German, Romanian, and Italian Axis troops killed, along with around 500 civilians in Stalingrad and the surrounding areas. To this day, many who died there still have their bodies there. That is over 2 million humans dead. Now, many neighbors have reported being haunted by the spirits. When I say neighbors, I should actually rephrase that as neighborhoods. It is a huge area here that is just plagued by spirits of the deceased after the battle ensued here. Now, in addition, and just like the previous battles mentioned, sounds of war, screaming have all been reported. But one terrifying thing here is that families that are living here claim to see these apparitions actually manifest in their homes, many of whom are dressed in World War II era uniforms. These spirits also appear on the streets, the Volgograd State University, as well as the former German field hospital. So, what's interesting about this is the similarities to the other conflicts. But one thing I want to highlight here is that we know back in 2011, when Japan suffered from that earthquake and the tsunami, causing the deaths of almost 19,000 people. Once the country began to rebuild in the wake of this disaster, people started to notice spirits of those who passed to be walking around, even entering people's vehicles. It's very similar, in my opinion, to Volgograd. Of course, very different cause, but the result is the same. It's just so much death, so much manifested fear and energy in these areas that undoubtedly result in strong appearances by apparitions. In closing, it brings me a lot of pain just to look at such a loss of life. And this is a rough gauge here. I just did a quick little search, but estimates for the total number of human beings killed in wars throughout all of human history range from 150 million to 1 billion. That's a very broad range, but I think, the baseline that they're starting at is that 150 million. That's just crazy. Oh my gosh, how many people have died from war? Now, you got to take it with a grain of salt because we only have records to go so far. And I'm sure that throughout all of our existence, there's been a lot more death than we will ever know. But war still exists today. There is a silver lining, though, possibly to this. Well, hopefully, one day, as mentioned at the start, nonviolent coexistence will supersede as opposed to violent co-annihilation. But that if the post-battle of Edge Hill shows us anything, is that laying to rest the bodies of those who died in battle can help maybe put their spirits to rest. Perhaps then, and this is me being very bold, we have more power. You could spin this in so many different ways, but we are living, breathing, we are alive, and that means something. And to be alive and to be able to take people that have passed away, while their souls, for whatever reason, may be attached to their bodies still, maybe not. Their energy, their apparition, their manifestation is still there, but maybe their body has to just be properly buried or handled. There's something there that we as the living have a power with. And I'm not saying we're superheroes or anything like that, but we have an ability, and maybe that means we also have a slight responsibility to do our due diligence and help individuals that are stuck in these purgatory-like states to move on. Or maybe it's just something that we can't, and it's just they're forever stuck there. But if what is to be said about the Edge Hill to be true, the battle there where they were burying the bodies and those reenactment apparition soldiers eventually started to disappear for the most part, then it goes to show, and at least it tells me that we have a lot of power here with how we affect that other realm, those souls, whatever they really, really are. We have a lot of power over that. And again, I think it's because we are living. Many more haunted battlefields exist out there. And again, it's a huge rabbit hole to look into. But I think that they all do share a strikingly similar variety of occurrences, whether it's the sounds and the screams and the gunshots and whatnot. Ultimately, we're still on the hunt to officially prove that the world of the paranormal truly does exist. But if haunted battlegrounds are anything to the case in point, like there's a lot of weird things going on, but it's just another piece of the puzzle overall. You look at haunted houses and haunted battlefields, and most people don't think about that really when you go to a different country or just a place where there's a lot of war of an open field, and just the history that's attached there when you're walking on that ground, and the amount of death and the amount of bodies that have been killed there, and that history. I already said history, but I'm just rumbling on at this point. You understand what I'm getting at. There is a lot of stuff going on out there, and hopefully someday we'll figure out those answers. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this. Like I said, there are many haunted battlefields out there because war has been around for a very long time, and we've been fighting all over the place. Maybe I'll have to do like haunted oceans and see if maybe we can get into like ghost ships and stuff. I think I've talked a little bit about that before on a previous episode on a Campfire Clues, but that might be something fun to look at. But I digress. Thank you everyone for tuning into this week's episode of Cryptid Clues. We'll be back next week with another paranormal deep dive. Until then, you can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, social media channels, and if you want to reach us directly, you can do so via CryptidClues@gmail.com. So until then, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, take care and stay safe.